Hello, good evening, and welcome to The Big Debate, coming to you live on SABC2 and SAFM as South Africa enters a new era under the leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa. I'm Ridi Tlhabi. Thank you for joining us. Now, South Africa is the protest capital of the world. Every day, our TV screens are filled with pictures of demonstrators burning tires, trashing shops, delivering memoranda. Are we protest junkies, or is this a sign of an uncaring system which only changes when we shake it? Should the police take a tough line against protesters, or should we all be grateful that South African citizens have the courage to fight for a better society? Would we have any of the democratic freedoms that we take for granted, like workers' rights and freedom of speech, if it were not for our rich tradition of social movements and protest? Well, with me to discuss this are John Jeffrey, the Deputy Minister of Justice, Zaki Ahmed, activist, co-founder of the Treatment Action Campaign, Chumani Makwele, one of the first Rhodes Must Fall and Fees Must Fall protesters who was made famous for throwing poo at the statue of Cecil John Rhodes, Wanelisa Xaba, a fallist and feminist, Nontle Mbuthuma from the Amadiba Crisis Committee in Xolobeni in the Eastern Cape, and of course, business analyst Phumlani Majozi. And in our audience, we have activists and leaders of social movements from communities across South Africa. Welcome to you all. So you at home can have your say on Facebook or Twitter, or send us a missed call and we'll call you back to hear your comment. Listen to SAFM during the commercial breaks to hear those comments on air. But before we talk about the role of social movements and protest in South Africa, take a look at this.
Democratic South Africa was built on protests. 1994, government promises to work closely with communities to deliver a better life for all. But it wasn't long before citizens took to the streets again, frustrated with slow delivery.
Between locals and foreign nationals. A year later,
Xolobeni, a coastal village in the Eastern Cape, rich with arable land. In 2007, an Australian company found titanium in the sand dunes, a valuable metal used in cell phones. Nontle Mbuthuma lives in Xolobeni. She's worried that mining will destroy their land and livelihood.
It's the only small part that has not been taken away from the people. Most of the areas, they've been pushed away from their own land. We are the only community that have access to the ocean, access to the land, everything.
Nontle helped form the Amadiba Crisis Committee. They selected leaders from 5 villages and raised their concerns with government. But in 2008, the mining operation was given the green light.
They were just drilling in our houses like this, in our fields, and when we tried to chase them away, but they will keep coming back. And even when we report to the police, to everybody, nobody was assisting us.
Tensions rose between the community and government. Bazuka Radebe, chair of the Amadiba Crisis Committee, is murdered in front of his family by assailants dressed as police officers.
Really, it was a bomb, the murder of Bazuka. He was a founder of the ACC, actually.
Until today, no one has been arrested for Radebe's murder. Radebe is not the only protester to die under troubling circumstances. Andries Tatane was beaten and killed by police in Vicksburg when protesting over housing and basic services. In Marikana, 34 striking mine workers were shot dead. But not every protest movement ends in violence and defeat. When President Thabo Mbeki refused to provide life-saving medicines to thousands of South Africans living with HIV, the Treatment Action Campaign took him to court and won, But it was only when they turned to mass action that government was forced to listen. Zaki Ahmad was a founder of the TAC.
It was the first post-apartheid movement who openly advocated civil disobedience in a manner that was respectful of authority. Civil disobedience is against a policy, not against the government.
In 2003, the anti-retroviral rollout began, and millions of lives were saved.
Before the start of the march, the protest.
In 2015, students rose up against the high cost of education. They had wide support for their demands, but their tactics were criticized.
Vote the government out of power if you are unhappy with it. Don't ban public buildings. Remember, the buildings don't belong to government, they belong to the people.
Students argued that they only turned violent when campuses became militarized and interdicts were used to criminalize protest.
Violence is endemic in our society. And when politicians and businesses and capital don't listen to people, then the question of violence becomes this. If someone throws a stone at a policeman or a policewoman because the mayor refuses to see them, who's responsible for that violence? We cannot put poor people in a situation where the only time they listen is when they burn things.
There are some cases where government cooperates with civil society. The Department of Justice works alongside activists in its LGBTI task team. Can this be extended?
I've just learned that if there is no violence, your struggle is never been taken seriously.
Let me start with you, Deputy Minister of Justice, John Jeffrey. How do you feel about protesters being criminalized? From Marikana to Vicksburg, those images that we've seen, we seem to treat protesters like the wretched of the earth.
Yep, that's a problem. Firstly, our legal system does allow for a lot of community involvement. So whether you've got ward committees at a ward level to work with the councillor, the integrated development plan process, school governing bodies, community police forums, there's lots of places for people to participate. Yes, there's a problem if people are not listened to. And one of the things that President Ramaphosa announced yesterday, it was throughout his speech, was the need to engage with stakeholders. So yes, as government, we need to
So government doesn't understand the law and the rights of people to protest?
No, what I'm saying is that there's opportunities for people to engage with government, and there need to be more opportunities. That's really the key issue.
Okay, let's talk about, you've spoken about Cyril Ramaphosa, so we are in this new era with a new president. Do these protesting and marginalized communities have a reason to be confident under a Ramaphosa presidency? I mean, he is a billionaire, and if you listen carefully to his speech, he seems to believe that most of our answers will be provided by business.
No, I don't think that's what he was saying. What he was saying a lot was engagement with stakeholders and engagement with civil society. So he emphasized, whenever he spoke about business, he spoke about organized labor as well. The importance of people getting together to address the problems. From justice's side, that's what we're doing. There's an issue of sexual offenses. We organized a 2-day workshop with civil society groups, even involve them in the planning of those workshops. That's the way it should be
You're
done.
smiling, Zaki, and I can see you don't believe the Deputy Minister. All of you, do you believe him? You do believe
No.
You don't? Okay, we'll get to that in just a moment. But Zaki, you are always on the streets. You are always protesting. From the Treatment Action Campaign, #Unite Behind, Ngifuna Ukwazi, Social Justice Coalition. Isn't it time to get off the streets? We've got a new president in town. And you heard Prince Mashele. He says the best way to protest is to use your vote. Get off the streets.
Well, let's start by saying if President Ramaphosa goes after all the criminal syndicates that Jacob Zuma implanted, and not only Jacob Zuma, but other gangsters inside the ANC. And the Minister of Justice has to tell us why the NPA leadership is so bad. But apart from that, the question for us is those criminal networks have to be taken out. But people are hungry. People are in debt. More than 80% of South Africa has to borrow money. Yeah. I'm one of them, so I know. So people have to borrow money. And we cannot be in a situation where we don't take seriously the question of race class and gender. And in our society, class is constituted by race and also by gender. And it's critical for all of us here to remember that unless we deal with the enormous inequality and injustice, we won't be able to have a better society, a society that is less violent.
You seem to be suggesting that people have much to protest about. There was Cyril Ramaphosa, the new president, in his maiden State of the Nation address last night. He says he wants to work with NGOs. Will you back off a little and give him a chance?
Look, I think when the president does the right thing, we need to support him. But we want to hear what he's going to say to the widows of Marikana. That's what we want to hear. We want to say what, he mustn't talk about NGOs in general. He must talk to us about who he's going to speak to. And I want to give him a chance. I really do want to give him a chance. But he really has to get rid of the gangsters in his government.
And we must remember that he was part of the previous dispensation and
Complicit.
administration as well. Do you agree? Nonhle, let me come to you. I mean, you say emphatically in that video that you've just seen that government doesn't listen unless people resort to violence. You seem to suggest that the government is the enemy of the people. That's a bit extreme. You believe that?
I actually believe that because since 1994, we're just hoping that this country, there will be no burning tires. But it's more. It's more than before. Because our government are not listening what people want. It's always imposing.
Okay, I want to talk about Cyril Ramaphosa precisely because he is our new president. He knows a lot about mining, and in his speech yesterday, he said we must expand mining to create jobs. Are you confident that this time around things will change and that you will be heard in the way in which you were not heard previously?
Actually, I don't buy it, and I don't believe it. It's still going to be the same thing, because in South Africa, it's seemingly the only development it's mining, which is not. That is why we are in this crisis. If our government is just looking carefully, is the mining industry benefiting our people?
Your answer is no.
It's no.
Phumlani, I want you to come in here. You are a business analyst. Business has much to be ashamed about. If conditions for workers were humane, if salaries were decent, then we wouldn't have this level of anger and the conditions that have been described by both Nonhle and Zaki Ahmed.
It's a complex one, I have to be honest with you. It's a complex one because when I look at it from my perspective, I just think there is a problem with when we can look at it from a politics perspective, in the sense that politicians are failing to listen to people and to deliver on the necessary services.
They are on the side of business.
You could argue that to an extent. So what I'm arguing is that, but there is also the fact that we also have a culture. Because to me, in some situations, I have an issue with the protest, where in some instances you find it that only the rights of those who are protesting are sort of much, protected and prioritized.
But their rights are not protected if we say that the state is clamping down on them, they're getting arrested, they're not being heard. In what way are their rights of the protesters being respected?
My point is this, for example, you tend to find that the people who are protesting, they tend to maybe roll over the innocent people's cars, people who are just driving on the streets and so on.
Hold on.
So it becomes difficult because you don't want to be...
Give him a chance, wait.
Yes, give me a chance to speak. You don't want to be... If I am not involved in a protest, right, I don't think I need to have my property vandalized. I need to be in a situation where whether it's my car, whatever, it's being burned.
You disagree with the tactics, the manner in which they protest?
Tactics.
And the cause itself? The cause itself?
No, the cause is fine. You can protest if you want. Okay. Depending on where you come from, you have a right to say democracy.
Okay, hold on. He's spoken. Let's go to Khumani. Okay, so you protested in the most unconventional way. You threw poo at Cecil John Rhodes' statue. I mean, that is human feces. Why did you do that? Isn't that an extreme tactic?
Well, first and foremost, in Cape Town, people say that Cape Town is a multi-billion rand city. Okay, and Cape Town is Camps Bay, is Khayelitsha. Then if you walk in Khayelitsha, there's a human feces on the road, and the kids are playing with the human feces. Okay, now as a poor student who went to UCT, I learning politics in UCT. And politics taught me that go and help issues of people. And then, of course, for me, activism didn't start because I went to UCT. I was staying in Delft when I started to join Street Meditation Campaign. I saw the human condition of our people. When I saw the feces that children were playing it in Khayelitsha, I decided myself that let me take these feces and go and throw it at white people. Because it belongs there. And of course, this approach was again a response to this critique, which is a lazy critique of caring about people's property. And immediately when I took that pool there, UCT, the first thing UCT said to me, said, this is unhygienic. And then I wanted that unhygienic approach response.
Wanelisa? Okay, we've got less than a minute before the next ad break. Wanelisa, your word. What do you think about what we've been discussing so far, and especially this binary between tactics and the end justifies the means?
I mean, I think, when John Jeffries talks about Cyril Ramaphosa wanting to engage stakeholders, I think that's the most perverted thing I've ever heard in my life. Because you have a mass murderer who is a president of this country saying that they want to engage stakeholders when they've killed people. I mean, how do you...
You don't think the Farlam Commission cleared him? You don't buy that?
No, I mean, I don't buy that, but at the same time, I think there's exactly a lazy critique around what is violence and the ideology of violence. And I think, it's racialized as well. So black people are violent, but white people are not that violent, right? And also, I don't think when we protest against the violence of the state, that it is violence. It is a response to violence.
We are going to talk about that in the next segment. What is violence? What is violence is precisely what we're going to explore next. Or rather, where does violence start in poor communities in South Africa? And is there a peaceful way to move society forward? These questions when we come back. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Big Debate live on SABC2 and SAFM. Now, we're talking about social movements and protest, and we're trying to understand where violence comes from. I want to talk to some residents from Maryvale, a community built on a disused military base in Ekurhuleni. Coal deposits were found in the area, and the SANDF, the army, came in to evict the residents. Yesterday, the residents actually won their case against the army. So you are here, I've got Chris and Dumi. You were protesting against evictions. What happened during the protest?
Okay, during the protest, that was on the 29th November.
Okay, we need a microphone, thank you very much. Start again, Chris, thank you.
That was on the 29th November in the afternoon when we decided to go out on protest, because now we have now had a very serious problem of seeing the ambulances coming in, picking up people. We have been trying to call the police to come and assist. Police never responded, and we went outside the place where we were, where the soldiers were actually beating up people.
When did the violence start? What happened?
They actually came to me and say to me, as a community leader, you must know that we're coming to evict
This
people.
is the army.
That's right. And I said to them, where is the court order? They said, no, we don't need a court order to evict people.
And that goes to your point about the nature of violence. What is violence? So they just arrived.
I said to them, okay, it's fine. You can see you've got weapons and we don't have weapons. What we're going to do, we're going to fold our hands, and when you finish, we go into court. We're going to meet at the court of law, because there is nobody that is above the law in this country.
But Dumi, maybe you can tell me this, because I think the story is very fascinating. You actually have community members paying rent because the houses in which you live are owned by Public Works. Yes. So community members are actually paying rent to the government, and then the army, upon hearing that their coal deposits moved in. Is that what happened?
Yes. When we enter to the Maryvale, we had a lease agreement with Department of Public Works. We're paying rents to Department of Public Works. Then all of a sudden, they came and say, we must stop because the money, they don't know where the money is going.
And how long had you been living there? When was this community established?
We've been living there for quite, it's been about 20 years ago now. We're talking about 20 years.
Deputy Minister, I must challenge you here. we've seen the scenario. We know about the red ants. You've heard of the red ants, right? Who come in at the crack of dawn when it's very, very cold in winter to evict people. Surely that is a form of violence, and the state is responsible for it.
Sure. Unfortunately, I'm Deputy Minister of Justice, so I don't know anything about the Maryvale issue.
Okay, we've just told you though.
Sorry? Yes, no, you've told me that side.
Okay, wait.
And unfortunately, I'm the only person from government that you have here. So it makes it a little bit more difficult to respond on those issues. But what I do want to take issue with
But are you going to say that people should be evicted in the manner that
No,
these people were evicted?
I agree with
so
that.
So just
but
condemn it.
Yes,
on principle,
look,
even though you don't know about.
Sure. But I need to hear both sides of the story. So I've heard this side, and what is being said sounds very bad. And it seems as though the courts have supported the community, which is good because we have the rule of law in South Africa. But it's difficult to comment without having the full picture. And let me just say on the full picture, in terms of the earlier comment on President Ramaphosa being, I think, what was the comment, a mass murderer or whatever. What evidence is there? There was a commission of inquiry under Judge Farlam. It heard evidence over a number of months. It found that there wasn't even a prima facie case against the president. So let's also not distort things. It might be easy to say this person is a killer, that person did this, but there needs to be evidence. And the difficulty with this engagement here is you haven't, if anyone has any justice issue, bring it to me so I can respond. I'll be able to respond.
Well, we have brought one to you, and
yes,
you said
this is not a justice issue, though. It's a land issue. We have as government passed.
Will you support the prosecution?
If there is
unlawful,
if there's unlawful action that has taken place, yes, there needs to be prosecution. And yes, those people need to be disciplined if they're working for the state.
Okay, Zaki, let me bring you in here. Where does the violence come from? I mean, and where do we locate courts in this whole struggle that is being run by social movements?
Well, I think there's not a person here who's not familiar with violence. And the first type of violence people will experience is hunger. The second type of violence people will experience is when they get robbed, going to school. Pregnant women not being looked at when they're in a hospital, or their babies just getting dropped. A careless society in which at the heart of it, as we're speaking now, one of my comrades, Vuyelwa Mati, her sister was murdered by a boyfriend. So we have a system where the combination of racial violence, of patriarchal violence, and of capitalism, on the other hand, destroys people's being. And in such a system, and especially one with our legacy of slavery and colonialism together, the difficulty is that the state, and here I'm talking particularly about the police, the army, and the lower court system, really have that in their DNA, that violence.
Wanelisa, I mean, is there a chance that we're making excuses and justifying all sorts of violence? I mean, there's violence even within protest movements. Can you speak to that?
I mean, I just want to backtrack because I think being black, breathing as a black body is violence, because we are living in a white supremacist society, and that erases your whole being. And so we need to be very honest that currently in South Africa, we're living in post-apartheid apartheid. It's not a democratic society, and that is violence, right?
So as a result, do we then accept or justify all sorts of violence?
I think that it's all encompassing. It's not just physical violence. It's psychosocial, it's spiritual, it's everything, right? And so when the ANC take over and they become the gatekeepers of white supremacy, which is violence, they then become a militarized state that does things like that, and then they continue the violence. Capitalism is violence.
Okay.
Right?
All right. We'll hear more from our audience members. When we return, we also hear from the new president, Cyril Ramaphosa, and we ask, once again, what role there is for activism and protest in post-Zuma South Africa. You're watching The Big Debate. Welcome back to the big debate on civil society, social movements and protest. We're live on SABC2 and SAFM. We're also live on Facebook and YouTube. Send us your comments and join us for a second hour of the discussion online at 8 p.m. Now, social activism doesn't always require protest or confrontation. Let's listen to the new president, Cyril Ramaphosa, reaching out to communities in his State of the Nation speech.
In recognizing the critical role that NGOs and community-based organizations play in tackling poverty, inequality, and related social problems, we will convene a social sector summit during the course of this year. Among other things, this summit will seek to improve the interface between the state and civil society, and also address the challenges that NGOs and community-based organizations face.
Okay, let's have a show of hands. How many of you will be attending this summit? Do you believe the new president? You raising your hands? Yes, yes. Very few of you will be there. Okay, all right, let's...
But really, sorry, I mean, how can you ask the question? I mean, the president announced it last night. It's not clear who's going to be invited, how the participation
John,
is going to work.
It's a principle. What I'm saying is, are they willing to give the president a chance? Are they willing to participate in a call for collaboration and activism? That's what I mean. Hold on.
Okay.
Not that, what do you think this is a good move? Because, and it's important, John, that I say this, because the previous president, in a State of the Nation address, actually said that NGOs should not be trusted because they are being funded from elsewhere. So this is a very
John was probably one of the people
and
who
this
clapped.
is a very different message. So it's important. No. But it is important. It is important to highlight that precisely because we come from a dispensation where these people were seen as the enemy by the previous president. So what do you say, okay?
Honestly, his statement is so confusing because all this chaos, it was happening under his nose.
Okay, and then you, what do you say about this summit?
Well, I suppose
Khumani?
the student will have to respond to that call. At the end of the day, we are not protesting cows. We have to champion our own goals. We know that President Ramaphosa is lobbied both by capital as well as the business. But as a community, also we are voters in this country, we have to go and lobby him. Now, if we are outside the summit, we cannot be able to lobby the president.
Phumlani, what do you say? Is it time for civil society to just step back and create a different environment with the government?
It's time to get involved. And I agree with
they have been involved.
I'm trying to say that I agree with the president that there should be this summit that's going to take place,
Right.
or at least he plans to put in place sometime this year. And there has to be an engagement, right? We as citizens, we have to be involved. We don't have to give up, right? I mean, I understand my sister's situation that he may have had some issues faced there and so on. But I think I would love to say that we have to get involved. Let's give the president a chance so that the people who throw poo to other people's private property and so on, and the state,
That was Cecil John Rhodes' statue. That's not a public property.
Okay. But
It's not a private property.
But my point is that the activists, people like you who are making an impact, can engage with some people who are from an abusive
But you're not
state.
addressing one issue for me,
Yes.
where, like, this community, where they were engaging with the government and they were not being listened to. You are arguing as if every time civil society engages with the government or the powers that be, they are listened to. What happens when they're not being listened to? What's your solution for that? You don't have a solution. You don't have. Okay. Let's just say we have. Okay, no, quickly.
And on top of what you're saying, as our communities right now, they are talking about eviction. Yes. My question, what is going to be changed when he is a president? Because all these things are happening in front of himself. Like for example, in my case, we try many times, 100 times, to our government that we seek for justice. And our people are being killed.
our people are being murdered. Our people are being kicked from the land. But there is no response from our own government.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Professor Sipho Siepe because he is a political analyst, and you were very vocal in your support, it seemed, of the former president Jacob Zuma. Many of these people have had to take his government to court to get some sort of recourse and relief. If I use your example as the Maryvale community, you have to spend money or find some lawyers who are prepared to take your case for free. So there is money that is involved. That government was not responsive.
Yeah, you know, I was asked that question on the radio, and I said I take accountability for every statement that I've said and that I've written. And every time I get into a public space, I talk about fairness, treatment, that fair treatment. And if somebody, even if I don't like the person, is treated unfairly, you take a position. But now, getting back to the debate here, what is emerging here is that we need to sophisticate our understanding of violence. And as Saki was talking about, there are people who think that violence is simply when people attack the bodies. There is a violence of poverty. There's cultural violence. When you are a black person and every day...
Hold on, Sipho. I think we've already said that. And it's been described by so many people. But I do need you to answer for what happens when governments that are supported or presidents that are supported are the ones who are acting in that way. They are the ones who are not listening to the people, as happened.
Quickly, the issue of summit, while it is attractive, is not going to sort out our problems on this issue. And secondly, the ANC claims, among other things, to be a leader of society. So effectively, they don't need a summit to know what people go through on a daily basis. So one cannot buy that. And secondly, I think John is correct to say you have these forums. But what we know, because of what is happening, is that those forums are not functional or are not working. This is why people, and thirdly, the people don't just wake up in the morning and to say we're going to engage in the struggle.
So why do you spend so much time praising the government of President Zuma if you are aware of these social problems?
I think you did. You did. You again, Reddy, you take a position that I have taken.
I'm responding to your position.
Wait. Take a position. I mean, there's Stephen Grootes asked me about Menzies Miyani's appointment. I said, but I've never supported Menzies.
No, we can't talk about that because those people are not here.
But I'm giving, if you are going to accuse somebody, be specific so that I can respond to that. What I can tell you is that I support the notion of fairness. And you cannot find anything that I said that will say it is an unfair treatment. And even now, what I say is, I stand by the issues of whether you treat people fairly or not. And in this discussion,
okay.
Yeah, no, wait.
Quickly, Sipho, we've got...
No, in this discussion, the issue is, how do we deal with protest and how does we make
it... What do you want to say?
The organization...
Okay. So now, you have a situation, Sipho, where people burn trains. Now, I can show you a video where people pull the window out of the train and they try to get on top of the train to get to work. But your president was paid R1 million a month over 4 months from a contract that was in PRASA. Jacob Zuma. Hold on. Let me just be fair and put evidence before you that you have a situation right now where there's a criminal gang that has stolen 24 billion that allows women to be pushed in with men in a train as if they're sardines, that allow men to be pushed off trains as they're trying to get in. And that is because not only you, but John himself have not spoken out against the violence that this system and the corruption that Jacob Zuma led and continues to lead, even from Nkandla. You need to answer for that, as the John.
I'll give you a chance, John. I'll give you a chance to respond to that. So we'll get your responses in just a moment, especially you, Deputy Minister. As an active citizen, what message do you have for President Cyril Ramaphosa? We hear from community leaders after the break. You're watching The Big Debate. Welcome back to the big debate on civil society, social movements and protest. I'm Ridi Klabi. Now, the National Development Plan calls for us to be active citizens and to make our voices heard and to take actions to improve our lives. So, what will you be doing in 2018? Do you have a message for the President and his cabinet? Let's just start here. You are from Marikana, am I right? What do you want to say to the new President?
I am Tumeka Magwangana from Marikana. After 5 years of the massacre, there is no change in Marikana. We are still living in poor conditions, as if we are not living next to the mines. Cyril Ramaphosa got shares in Lonmin, but he never protected the mine workers. I want to ask him, how is he going to protect the South Africans in the hands of the policemen?
Okay. Deputy Minister, it's a fair point, and you spoke quite emphatically about Cyril Ramaphosa, the president, being cleared. But the fact of the matter is that we haven't seen any prosecutions of the police. So it seems as if the state is closing ranks and targeting the miners.
As far as I know, some people were charged recently. Again, I don't have all the facts of that.
That's a problem.
Well, it's also an issue of then you should have got somebody to speak on Marikana from the state side, which is not what you asked me to come and speak on.
But what we're seeing now is some policemen who are involved in that now speaking out, but there's been no prosecutions.
People who commit crimes, whether they are police, whether they're public servants, whether they're politicians, must be prosecuted.
Zaki, that's acceptable? You're right with that?
All what I can say is, I wish, what I would like to see is President Ramaphosa going to not Sea Point beachfront to jog, but to go walk with the people of Marikana and to go and walk with people. But this argument constantly that, I would like Deputy Minister John Jeffries to have the facts at his fingertips, because that's what a minister does, especially in a justice portfolio, when there is no justice for people. I would like you to have those facts at your disposal.
Phumlani, I want to bring you in here because you're intimate.
Okay, your response. To Zaki, the National Prosecuting Authority is independent. They are responsible for the prosecutions. I don't know the facts of all those prosecutions, so I'm not able to answer.
Can you not
yes, I can ask questions. I can ask questions if I know which questions to ask, because there are a number of cases. So that's the issue. I can't respond, unfortunately, about Maryvale.
What are you saying, sir? You've got a microphone. What's your comment?
Thank you very much. I mean, why should we as protesters, be treated like lunatics? Because obviously, before this protesting strategy...
Where are you from? What are you protesting about?
I'm from Enedale. I'm representing Hopefield and Kapok, the informal settlement.
What are you protesting about?
I'm protesting about the land. Why should we, people, be treated as lunatics when we're protesting? Because before the protest, there's a march. And I think with the march, it's peaceful. We get everything in black and white. When it comes to us protesting, it's because of you guys who are in authority don't come to our rescue.
Phumlani,
that's why I'm asking.
I want you to respond to this one because it goes to the heart of where you entered this debate about tactics, that people don't feel heard. I mean, that was a very powerful suggestion from Zaki, that instead of walking on the promenade, perhaps the most relevant and symbolically powerful and empathetic thing to do would have been for Cyril Ramaphosa to go to Marikana. So where does that locate your problem about protesters behaving badly like lunatics?
Look, I agree with Mr. Akman. We have to have, you've got to have the president. It would be best the president gets out there, and to be in Marikana, to speak to the people who are involved in this situation, to engage with them, to show that he cares, right? Whether we'll do that or not, we're going to have to wait and see. These are politicians. But when it comes to tactics, I have to say this, Reddy, and the audience. My view is that we are in a serious sort of situation where I wouldn't say that protesters are violent or whatever, but I would sort of say that our society, we've just spoken about the state that came and killed people, right? Abused people, the state that came, the army and so on, that came and evacuated people. So there is a sense of the violence that we see in our society. The question is then, how do we engage to come to a solution? And that is why I was saying that we've got to give the president the chance with that summit that he wants
Will you be
to
going
put
back
in
to your
place.
friends, the ones that you analyze, the ones that run banks, and tell them
Yes,
that their
I'm gonna
system
tell
is violent?
them.
So you've just learned that on the big debate today. I want to take this microphone.
really just-
I see
Yeah.
HIV positive TAC Limpopo. So that's the historic context of protest. Tell us about protest action, what you achieved, and why you think you achieved that.
Okay, one, I think protest, it actually shows.
What's your name?
Oh, my name is Anele Yao.
From the Treatment Action
I'm the
Campaign.
General Secretary of TEC, yes. One, power lies with the people. We are the ones who give like people like Deputy Minister of Injustice our votes to be in power. So now the mistake here is that
of injustice.
One of the things that we need to understand as the people, when we stand up and fight for our rights, we need to engage. We need to protest. We need to litigate. But how do you litigate if you are a poor community? Where are these law firms that normally support other programs that we need to have these law firms to go to these communities, support them. But lastly, I want to tell you, Deputy Minister of Injustice, that yes, I want to tell the Deputy Minister of Injustice that if violence, it is colonialism, apartheid, patriarchy, inequality, and injustice. So if he defends that, he must be able to say he stands with the people away, and you need to speak out and not protect your salary.
We're going to give you a chance. We'll give you a chance to speak. Okay, a lot of accusations directed at the Deputy Minister. It's only fair that we give them a right of reply. We'll do that in a moment. When we return, we hear our last word from our panel. Don't go away. Welcome back to the big debate. We are live on SABC and SAFM. Don't forget, when this show ends on television and radio, the discussion continues on Facebook and YouTube. So stay with us online and give us your views. But first, let's hear what our panel have taken away from today's discussion. Let me start with you, Kumani.
Well, for us, we have to, as student activists, mention that if you are an activist, you must know that there's a price to pay. If you have not died, or any member of your committee have not died, then you have not struggled. Secondly, currently as students, there are students who have been suspended, expelled, in jail. Now, we are facing plus minus 10 cases, UCT alone, in Wynberg Magistrate Court. We would like the president to intervene in those cases. Our struggle has been won. Government now is taking that project as his own. And yet, we, the people who suffered there, are in court. Now we would like, now we make a plea to government to intervene, to drop those charges of students whose struggle and whose cause has been won. Today we've got a free education, and yet tomorrow we are going to Magistrate Court arguing the case about the very issue that we are talking about. Now we request the president to really intervene in those cases, as serious cases. Many students are being expelled through those disciplinary hearings.
Publani, your closing
Look,
argument.
I just think, for me, I think we as a society, we have a problem of violence, right? Even right now, as we speak.
No.
We have...
Carry on. The microphone can pick you up. Carry on.
I'll give you the statistic, right? I'll give you the stats. There's a problem with violence, right? Already, when you look at the crime statistics, we have about 51 people killed a day, right? So my point is that we have a culture of violence that comes from, in some instances, from the state itself, the police, killing people in Marikana, but also from our movements as well. We saw in Marikana where even unions, the people were killed because the violence was within the movement itself. So the question is how we, as a country, deal with that complex and that complex problem. And I think a dialogue is important, because at the end of the day, whether we're a protester, whether we're a police and so on, I don't think violence is the right way to go.
Wanelisa, closing arguments from you.
I mean, I think what I've learned in the debate is that our Deputy Minister of Justice or Injustice cannot answer questions that are about justice. That's very sad. And also, I think, Pumlani portrays the black middle class a privilege where they can, talk about it. where they can have privileged Santon, opinions about our lives when they're sitting nicely and drinking kale smoothies. And I think what I want to just touch on is that the deeper issue right now is not that we're not engaging with government, but it's the fact that people are protesting when the people that have made commitments to free them are not doing that. That's the main...
Zaki, closing argument from you?
Well, I think the one thing about violence is we must look at places like Syria and Algeria and so on. And what I'd like all of us to do is to understand that we have to overcome violence, because we cannot have a situation where black people are going to kill black people. We cannot have a situation where we have white supremacy continuing in the way that it does. But the way in which we have to do it is to bring our power together through knowledge, through an understanding of our rights, through an understanding of justice, through building links not only here but with movements internationally, but above all, to respect ourselves. I'm not a black body. I'm a human being, I'm a person. My ancestors were slaves. I do not want to be seen as a body with property. I'm a human being.
Is that what you were trying to say, Phumlani? Nonhle?
Okay. For me, what I've learned today, that as a new president, if they just listen, the people on the ground, there will be no protests. Because as I'm speaking in Kolobeni, we take our own government to court, which is unusual. 23 of April, it will be in Pretoria High Court where we claim our right, which is so strange in a democratic country where the citizens, they claim the right that is there, but is no longer being implemented. They must implement, and the justice must be done for those people being murdered.
We're running out of time. There was a lot that was thrown at the Deputy Minister. It's only fair that we give him a chance to have the last
just
word.
to respond on that, I don't think it's so unusual for citizens to take the government to court. That's what the Constitution is there for. That's what the laws are there for. That's what the courts are there for. Government has to balance up different interests, okay? And government is elected by the people. It has a mandate. There's a number of different interests in society. It has to balance that up and decide which one to follow. Sometimes if there are disagreements, it can be resolved in court. But the key issue, the key message I would really want to say is there's lots of opportunities for engagement. I disagree with you that we're the protest capital of the world. I think somebody in Parliament said that there were 30 protests a day. But Africa Check was not able to establish that. Most of the protests, there's a lot of protests and demonstrations, most of them are actually peaceful. Let's make use of the opportunities for engagement between government and civil society.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister of Justice. Is the new leadership willing to work with civil society and community leaders and to actually listen to our concerns? Must we continue to mobilize to hold them accountable? Will there be more Marikanas or Maryvales? You decide. Thank you for joining the big debate. Stay tuned on YouTube and Facebook right now for another hour of this conversation. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye. You're watching The Big Debate, and we are continuing with our conversations. We really want to hear from community leaders, those who take to the street and protest and really feel, as we've heard this evening, that they're not being listened to. We're going to start here. You are with the Inner City. Tell us more about your movement and what you're protesting about.
My name is Philemon. I'm from Inner City Resource Center. It's an HO organization that is based in Johannesburg.
Put your mic up a little bit so we can hear.
So our problem in the inner city, really, we're facing a huge problem in the city whereby our people, especially the South Africans, they are living in the dark buildings that they are dilapidated. And the foreigners, they are living in the lavish places where our people they don't afford. And the mayor of Johannesburg, Mashaba, I remember the day he came to office, he was saying that he's going to get rid of this Mnyamandao. So that, no, come with me. He's going to get rid of this Mandao. Our people, they must live nice and all
What's a
those things.
Mnandao, sir?
Mnyamandao. Mnyamandao.
Oh.
Yes. Yes. So now, to us, our surprise, because we are there in a city, what do you call? We are in a city forum. We are following each and everything, all the steps that's there by the city. Mashaba now is creating more Mnyamandao. He's going each and every suburbs, cutting water, cutting electricity for the people. But he said that he's going to make sure that people are going to live little better place. But now, Mashaba now, he's the boss now of Mnyamandao. So we want to know what's going to happen.
You know, Zaki, I saw you shaking your head there. I saw you shaking your head there when he was referring to foreign nationals. And isn't it also a very tragic outcome of a lack of service delivery, that it divides the very same people who should be united, who are desperate, who are marginalized, that in the same abuse that we are experiencing, that perhaps we extended to other people, and this competition for scarce resources is affecting the poor people.
I think, I want to say that what's happening in your inner city is a very, very good example of injustice that continues to be perpetrated against working class and poor communities, particularly black working class and poor communities. But the mistake we very often make is to blame immigrants and foreigners. That's a mistake we make. It's not the problem that someone is pushed from their home in Sudan, or they're pushed from their home in Zimbabwe, or they're pushed away from our continent and they flee here because they have nothing. And we fight with each other, when in fact our struggle is with the resources that are there but are not being given and not being used, that we don't create equality on our continent, both at the homes of where people come from, like the DRC, and in Zimbabwe, but also in our own country. South Africa has enough wealth. If we look at what was Johannesburg built on, it was built on the blood of Malawians, it was built on the blood of the people from Lesotho, it was built on the blood of people from Zambia, and who came to work on our mines, together with people from Pondoland. And we must see ourselves, first and foremost, as poor people, working class people, middle class people working together. But we must deal with the inequality that Mashaba is going to visit upon Johannesburg. I come from Cape Town, where we have a DA government. I can tell you how bad it is. So we now warn you that the DA cares much more about wealth than it cares about people.
So, Deputy Minister, you're not the only target, the DA is as well. So it means that when you are in political leadership, the buck does stop with you.
Sure.
You accept that now? Okay.
But the only difficulty is there's 3 levels of government: local, provincial, national. I'm unfortunately the person
knew
who's
who you'd be
having
meeting
to be
here tonight,
well,
so
I expected more people from other levels of government.
Because people from levels of government don't want to speak to the people. That's why they're not here.
Thanks for coming. Yeah, so
I'm Ruth, a student from the University of Johannesburg. I think what protests do is that they reveal the problems that we have within our communities. And instead of Mr. Pumlani focusing on the nature of protest, as focusing on protest being violent, look at what causes the protest to begin with. It's because the structures that are supposed to help people with their grievances, the structures that are supposed to help people tell the government that our hospitals are not serving us, our clinics are not delivering medicines on time. Those structures are failing. Therefore, that is why we have protests. If we solve that, we solve protests.
This gentleman here. Yep. Thank you.
My name is Andile Mkebuza. I am the founder of the Black Sheep Foundation. My comment is very simple. In fact, I am in full agreement with what my sister there said earlier on, that there is no need for protests if the government is doing what it's supposed to be doing. Secondly, the issue with our government is that the government reacts to problems. They are not able to deliver on themselves, meaning that the miners in Marikana have to protest before they, meaning that people in our communities have to protest, and then it exposes the challenge that we have. One last thing that I want to comment, that I want to make very, 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 very quickly is that this country was built on protest. It was built by protesters, and it shall be built by protesters. But yet, this is just one piece of advice that I would like to share with my people, that I have a problem when we protest as communities and we destroy the existing infrastructure, when we destroy the schools, when we destroy the libraries, because my child needs those facilities. So I have that challenge. Thank you.
Kuman, I'm going to pick on you, and you, Annelisa. I'm going to pick on you for this one, because doesn't he have a point? When you burn the library, you lose a library. When you burn a clinic, you've lost a clinic. When you burn a school, you've lost a school. So who has the last laugh?
Yeah, I suppose, this is what we did in Rhodes Must Fall and Fees Must Fall. All the protests that we did, particularly UCT, we never banned anything. Up until when we took a shack, we built a shack, because we had no property, we have no accommodation at UCT. We built a shack and we put it in front of the university, and the university brought the police, okay? And of course, conditions differ. I can't speak for young people in, for example, in Wusu, okay, whom the very first violence is the fact that they don't have the first property. And of course, I don't say to them, go and ban clinics. It's not good, okay? Any activist knows that. But at the moment where police, when you protest peacefully and they come to you, like what happened to us, we built a shack, the university called the police destroy our shack, and then the next thing people ban out of anger, out of frustration, they ban the school bus, Now, there's always something that causes that which people do. For us, we didn't ban anything up until the police came shooting on us, private securities beating us, and then people ban stuff. But any community leader here, there's no community leader here takes people to ban buses.
But shouldn't we then, shouldn't we start having a different conversation then? That if our expectations are that the police are going to come in and do what you've just described, that even when they do that, we don't destroy that which belongs to us. You're saying that at that point, when it reaches that point, there's no longer room for that kind of negotiation?
I suppose this is what Comrade Zaki is saying, that we need to have education, okay? It's very hard. I worked during Zaki intervention campaign. It's very hard to have a logical debate with people who are already angry. But I'm saying to our comrades, it takes a skill, it takes knowledge to control a crowd of angry people. But our aim and objective in the future is to, as leaders, create small cells of people, whether 10 or 15 people, when people protest violently, we stop that and guide people towards a particular direction.
Annelisa, I do want your response to that, because
I think there's three things. The first is, I've written a lot about the ideology of violence, and it's really, really difficult to of course, negotiate when the oppressor, in this case is the police, boot is on your neck. So I think, I wouldn't characterize that as violence, but I would characterize that as a response to state violence. And, I always say, within the UCT context, when we were protesting, that when we talk about decolonization and destroying the current system, it's a very spontaneous thing. It's not something that is premeditated. And so when we set up a shack at UCT, and then there's police violence, the intention to take down the paintings of colonizers is not only a response to state violence, but an instant, political moment of decolonizing and recognizing that the structures...
Aren't you being too lenient on protesters and refusing to acknowledge what in South African lexicon has come to be known as criminal element? For example, when people start looting shops, where does that locate violence? Where does that fit into the kind of protest that you are calling for?
My personal experience with the student movement is that those elements, first of all, those elements were at universities. They were planted by the university. They were planted by the state. So you have a lot of footage. You have footage at CPUT where police and private security were actually the people who were wrecking the property just so that students would be labeled as violent. And so there's always like a third element in which the people who are organizing have no control over, because you don't know who's going to come in. But the third thing is around the nature, the gender nature of the way in which we protest. So a lot of my criticism, self-criticism and criticism of the movement that I'm from is around the patriarchal and violent masculinities within the Fees Must Fall movement, which then took element in which when people are protesting, they would enact very, very violent masculinities, and they would
In what way?
They would deviate from the script. They would deviate from the script.
In what way?
You know, I mean, you know, there were times when, you know, we would protest, and you know, we would say to people, okay, this is what we are going to do. So I remember there was one time we were in a strategic meeting, and we were talking about, you know, this is our strategy. We don't have enough numbers to shut down a university, and so we can't shut down physically. And there were some students who went and threw poo at an exam venue without the collective, you know, knowledge of everyone else who was in the strategic meeting. And so those are the things in which, you know, black cisgender heterosexual men within the movement would refuse to listen to women because they're women, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a gender element around it.
I mean, Zaki, I feel very strongly about this issue. I really do. I feel strongly, especially when, as black people, we protest against racism. Women are there protesting this racism that is affecting men and women. But when it comes to sexual violence, the very people who feel strongly about racism hardly ever join us. They hardly ever join us. So protest against patriarchy and sexual violence. Where do we start? You are a guru of protesting. How? He's always on the street. I suppose I'm talking about intersectionality, being aware that the rights that the right that you are fighting for doesn't excuse you from fighting for and embracing other rights.
Right. Look, I'll give you an idea. There was a young black lesbian woman from Khayelitsha, Zoliswa Nkonyana.
Yes.
You may remember that.
Yes.
And she was brutally murdered by men in the community. And there was also one woman who was part of the group who killed her. And the important thing to remember there is there must have been 72 court appearances. That's how well our justice system functions. 72 court appearances. Dockets getting lost, this getting lost, that getting lost. At every one of those protests, at every one of those court appearances, there were more than 100, 200, sometimes 300 people. And the irony of it is that apart from Free Gender, which is a black lesbian organization mainly based in Khayelitsha, which has 10, 15 members, the majority of people who actually went to the protest were straight black African people. Now, the vision that we get is that the people who beat up lesbians are black people. And yes, it's true. Black people do beat up lesbians. But the fact of the matter is that if we organize, it's important to correct ourselves, whether we're talking about how we speak in relation to women, how we speak in relation to lesbian women, how we speak in relation to people with disability, and so on. So it's critical that we learn. I have what I call my grandfather face, which is the patriarchal face that my grandfather gave me, which is when he used to throw a glass, when the glass wasn't cleaned properly, and you give him a glass of water and he throws the glass of water. Sometimes I get that face, and I feel ashamed of it. And it's important for men, for those of us who are men, to reflect on that, not only in protests, but in our daily lives. It's a struggle, and we as black men, we have a double duty to make sure that we stand to defend our own bodies, but the bodies of every person, irrespective of race, class, gender, sexual orientation.
And speaking of sexual orientation and identity, Deputy Minister, I mean, you have a task team, LGBTI task team, and I mean, I'm wondering, is that a way of engaging? How do we fix these problems that have come through? Tell us a bit about it.
That was set up, I mean, it was in the time of Minister Khadebe, and it was a response to requests from relating to the murder or the rape of lesbian women in particular. So a national task team was set up of government and civil society. It's generally praised. The UN Human Rights Commissioner praised it as an example of good practice. One of the issues is a rapid response team to monitor the cases in which LGBTI people are the victims. And I think that is a good opportunity for engagement. But the one issue I wanted to raise, I think it came up earlier in the debate, is there are a number of structures set up at different levels for communities to use. So whether it's ward committees to work with the ward councillor at a local government level, whether just let me just finish. Let me finish.
Which ward council works properly for people?
Let me finish if I can. You've got these structures. Why are they not working? So it's not saying, Zaki, that they are working in all cases. You've got an annual integrated development plan meeting at a ward level. Why are they not working? Khumani,
Do you know why they're not working?
No, I mean, well, let's. I think some of them would work, some of them don't. Khumani, I take my hat off to you for ensuring that the statue of Cecil John Rhodes was removed at UCT in 2015.
But there's still one in the
But
gardens.
why? Yes, in the gardens.
I mean, he
but
didn't
why?
get it
But
removed.
why did it take 21
not
years
him, it was
after
a whole
democracy
movement
for that statue to
of
go?
people.
Because that was a symbol of colonization. What was the SRC at UCT doing before then? Were they taking that up? So what I'm really saying is, I think as South Africans, we tend to have a problem where we sort of leave things if we're generally not too unhappy, and then it's only when we get really angry that things get taken up.
One minute, hold on. You're touching on something. Your reaction is fascinating to me because you are now challenging this accolade that has been given to Khumani. You're saying he didn't bring that statue down. It was a whole movement.
Oh my God, how?
I think
how would he have done that?
Okay, so what do you take exception to?
I mean,
I'm not starting a war between you, but
I mean, it's a whole movement. It's a whole movement of diverse people, of queer people, of trans people, of black women, of black men who took that statue down. It was not him. It couldn't have been him.
Like, I'm deliberately going here because this is
I'm
why.
in exactly the same position.
Because
where people will say to me, "You tack."
Yeah. There were a lot of you.
There were lots of people, and that's the tragedy. That exactly the point that both people in the media, they love individuals
and
they
heroes
love
and
the story of a great leader. So Cyril is going to save us. Cyril is not going to save us. We have to save ourselves. Right? But
you don't have a mic. Nobody can hear you.
Can I just correct? I
But-
accept the
but-
Rhodes Must Fall movement, but it was Khumani's
It's
spark.
for you to accept,
Yeah.
first of all. It's
No,
not for
I
you to
acknowledge
accept,
it.
first
I acknowledge
of all.
it.
I mean,
okay? And I
you can or
acknowledge
you not.
the role
But
that
you're
it played.
raising, when you're raising
Well,
a whole
he
movement.
did spark
Okay, let's
the
not
thing
belabor
off.
the point. The point that I was making, Zaki, because you are a guru protester, was exactly that the civil society movements perhaps do fall because we make celebrities out of people, and the media must take responsibility for that. Of course, credit where credit is due, and those who are catalysts must be acknowledged, but it's important to acknowledge that it is the collective, it is the people. Are there some... Nonhle?
Okay, yes. My deputy minister here just touches me, because when we are in a movement, in a collective, it's always, they always make as individuals.
Yes,
They individualize. That is why right now the fees must fall. It's just a tick in the box. And we must ask ourselves why the fees must fall. They were just taken on the street. And what was the root cause? Because the government is not spending the money where is needed. Is spending money where is not needed.
Did someone say Nkandla? Who's saying Nkandla? Are you saying Nkandla? Okay, let's just go to the back here. Hear some
John
voices.
doesn't want us
I'm
to say
interested
Nkandla.
to
You can say
hear
Nkandla.
voices
What's
of
the
young
problem?
women who want to speak this this evening. Grandfathers like you, absolutely. There's the microphone.
Now talk.
Yes, you can go ahead, please.
My name's John Clark. I'm a social worker, and for the last 16 years, been working with the Amadiba community in the Wild Coast. For the last 5 years, I'd worked with ARTA in protest against e-tolls. And I want to just ask, and I honor you, Deputy Minister, for being brave to come and face us. I've gone grey with frustration at the failure of the court system to be a level playing field. And that term that we now use is lawfare. Warfare, they say truth is the first casualty. In lawfare, it becomes a hostage. It means that the state, with its superior use of taxpayers' money, is able to hold us and hold the truth hostage for, it's now 16 years on the into Wild Coast Toll Road. For 16 years. And we're now still seeing an attempt to try and impose this development against the sensitivities. We've tried the engagement. I've visited it. So our frustration is, in this new era under Cyril Ramaphosa, I believe that he understands the Bill of Rights. He was co-responsible for writing it. They do not belong to the government. They belong to people. And it's so frustrating to me as a social worker who's also there honoring the Bill of Rights to see people rise up and then get shot and killed because of their attempt to try and claim those rights for themselves. So I just hope that you're going to now set a new tone in government as to how they deal and use the courts as instruments of justice, not of lawfare.
And look, John, I know you don't represent the Ministry of Minerals, but you are a representative of government, and I must ask this, perhaps it's an ideological conversation. When you take the case of Xolobeni, and I know there was another case of fracking, I think in the Karoo, right? When the government argues that we are under pressure to grow our economy, we're going to create jobs, new industries from tapping into people's natural resources, the people are saying, look, there are many ways of creating that. It doesn't include the mining. You can't impose a certain solution. I've worked on the radio. I've heard middle-class South Africans saying, we need jobs, our economy is not growing. But how is that more valid than a desire to hold on to your identity, to your way of life? How do we strike a balancing act? Does the government just say, we're talking to that mining companies in Australia because we want the money, we want the job, we're not listening to these archaic people who want to not move on and get into the 21st century?
As you said, I'm not the Minister of Mining, so the exact facts of what happened. No, I don't know.
He isn't,
with respect to the audience,
said, John, that's why I said
yes,
it's more an ideological,
yes,
a broader conversation around where you've got people and that's their land, that's their identity.
From government side, there's different stakeholders. They need to be listened to,
including Australian mining companies.
South Africans.
Okay.
It's we govern for the people of South Africa. But within South Africa, there are different stakeholders who have different interests. It's a question of listening to all of them and then taking a policy decision.
But some stakeholders have more influence and money than others, and those who don't have are not listened to?
Well, look, when it comes to Parliament, for example, everyone has the opportunity.
Don't get excited.
If with legislation, if communities of people are not listened to, then those bills can be struck down.
I'm very curious to hear your answer to this, because you are an analyst, you interact with business, and you seem to be, what shall I say, very accommodating of business. A situation like this, people were killed in Xolobeni.
Yes.
That war is ongoing. The Ministry of Minerals has been there to listen, but ultimately outsiders prevail because pursuit of economic benefits. How do you see this in a South Africa such as ours that has high unemployment, lethargic growth and all of that?
You see, there's a big problem with government, and I will be honest with this, right? I'm not to be, to be critical of you, Deputy Minister. I'm just saying that in many cases, you do find that, and this is an agreement to your point, that you do find that some big businesses, they will have an influence on our government, right? In such a way that they shape the policy of how things are getting done in their favor. So that is the case. And it's so true in many countries around the world as well, where government works its business and business has an influence, in how things are run. And I think that's a defective system. It needs to be addressed to ensure that if people are saying, no, this is a private, it's our place, we've been here for a while, we don't want to be, our place to be, we don't have to be moved for some sort of big corporates' purposes.
So money should not trump.
Yes, that's exactly my point. We shouldn't have that. So the moment you find big business working with government, I detest that and it frustrates me. And I think we as South Africans, we need to speak strongly against it to ensure that people there in communities, they don't get trumped by some big business deals with government.
And we also have a situation where politicians themselves, whether in the DA or the ANC, themselves have investments in those businesses, and we are talking about that.
So how you fix your system so that you have politicians who don't have some business interests? Because if the moment you have that, the moment you build the political system, you're going to have a problem.
Okay, let me start.
You are?
I'm Simpiwe Zwane from Thembelihle Crisis Committee. Firstly, I would just like to say to the minister, he must know, if he didn't know, that before we go on the street, on the protest, the protocols been followed because we engage with the officials. From the officials, plan B, it's obviously the march. From the march, they will just say, for the response, maybe on our memorandum, we'll just write that we give you 7 days to respond. And then they will just send a response on one sentence to say, we acknowledge your memorandum. From there, we'll have to sit for 6 months. After that 6 months, we are the ones again who need to write to them to say, we are the ones again, we need to write to them and say, what about the response? The issues or the crises are still there within our community.
Tell me about your crisis. You are Thembelihle in Mpumalanga.
At Lenisha.
Tell me about your protest. What were your grievances?
Our grievances since from 2002, service delivery. We wanted to see Thembelihle being informalized as a township, living in good conditions with electrified housing, sanitation, and everything, like everyone in suburbs. That is what we wanted. We only fight from 2002, only last year, where we managed to get an electricity from our government. And they didn't put the electricity because they wanted to. It's because of that violent protest that took place. And again, another thing that I just want to say to the minister and Phumlane there, to say, you won't understand. Yes. When I'm saying to you, I'm hungry and your stomach is full, then you won't understand which is what I'm talking about. Unless you go to informal settlement and stay there on a cold condition, then you shrink within your shack. When it's hot, the very same thing happens. When it rains, then you'll have to sleep standing all the day. So after all, with that anger, then they're going to say to us, they are having a violent protest. You won't understand. Again, when you say why the people who are protesting have to affect other people. But the question is, we wake up 3 a.m. planning to go on the street, to close the street peacefully. We burn tires. Then after maybe an hour, around 4, traffic is starting. People, they can see that there's a fire there, something is going on. Yes. Why can't they respect the poor, seek for the alternative road? Yes. But they're the ones who are permitting people to do that. Then, at the end of the day, we'll be taken as if we don't have sense, like we are mad or whatsoever, because just we are a poor, so our government doesn't even recognize us as poor.
on. We've got to. Again, I'm picking on you. You are a representative of government.
Shame, man.
Look,
can't we defend him a little
we
bit?
can,
Well, at
we
least
can,
have you and me
but-
to defend him.
No, hold on. We're having an
Yeah.
honest conversation because you've raised a whole lot of issues. And as a person who lives in Gauteng, I'm reminded.
They sent a white man to come answer for.
I'm reminded of Life Esidimeni. I'm asking this question with utmost compassion. That when the government, you are inside the government, what are the obstacles when you've got a local sphere, provincial sphere, national sphere? People are outside voting for a particular party. You have a government, whether it's local, provincial, or whatever. When you speak to a national representative, they'll tell you that the problems are at provincial. That's what happened with Life Esidimeni, right? And then you've also just said, speak to your ward councillors and so on. What do you understand to be the obstacles? Why is government not working seamlessly to address the issues that that lady there has raised? What are the problems?
Look,
corruption?
No, I think I don't know the issues of no, I mean.
I've asked him a question, let him answer.
I'm sorry, but
Let him answer.
This is about Joburg Metro, as I understand it. You know, it's not. I don't know every area in the country. I would.
Give him a chance. It's going somewhere. Okay. Carry on.
I mean, if you knew which communities, and this is mainly people from Johannesburg, then why didn't you get somebody from the Johannesburg Metro to come to respond? But anyway, on this issue, I don't know the issues. It is wrong
That's why
if
I'm asking you a generic, but John, this is the mistake you're making. I'm not asking you to address specifically everything she
Yeah.
is. I'm talking broadly that when people protest, whether against local, provincial, the question I suppose is, why is government generally not working seamlessly?
Look, I think the problem, okay, generically, because I can't respond on the particular issue, there would be plans for electrification, for example. There would have to be money, funds for electrification. Those should all be set out and made available to people who want them, who should be then able to see this is when my community is going to get electrified. So that's what should be happening. As far as people to approach for information, the one is the ward councillors.
Okay.
You know, I don't know if there's been any interaction with them or the ward committee members who are there to give people in the community a response as to what is happening with development in that area.
Okay, I must say we did invite about 15 politicians from whether provincial or national, but they were not available. And we're going to be reasonable and say this has been a very important and dramatic week politically. Some were called to Cape Town, and that's what happened. But it doesn't happen in a debate, John, that you'd call a representative of every single issue that's going to be raised. So if you are a representative of government, we expect that you will talk to us about the issues in a broad way. Nonhle?
Okay. No, I just want to speak about my minister here when he said that he's not aware about the issue of my comrade over there. But the issue of the murder of Bazuka is known international in the world. What the government have done of South Africa about the murder. As we're speaking, it's from the Hawks. The Hawks, they don't say anything. And go to the police, nobody's doing. And if you said that one you don't know, but what is about the murder of Bazuka, as today, there is no arrest, there is no justice.
So let's just remind our viewers that Bazuka was one of the leaders of the Amadiba Crisis Committee, and you are saying no mining on our land. He died under very mysterious circumstances, and that's what we understand. And also, the protest is also about the government. The word I want to use is do-nadering. Can I say that? The government having cozy relationship with business, with capital, with a mining company at the expense of the community, and you feel that you're not being heard. Have I summarized your...
Exactly, because Bazuka was leading the struggle on the ground. That is why he was being murdered. What is violent, actually? Is it violent when it's community on the street? It's not violent when the police, they took the gun and shot the community.
You You've had the microphone. You've had the mic for a while. Carry on, please.
What I want to say is that maybe let's have a close look on a few things. Let's look at a poor public consultation.
Okay, I don't know. There's something wrong with your microphone. Nobody can hear you. Let's take this one. You can have my one.
Okay, what I'm trying to say is that let's look at a few things. Let's look at a poor public consultation and look at government ignorance and also a coalition between a state and the private entities and inequality. When you talk about inequality, okay, my name is Bonton Changas. I'm residing in Jeepistown. So in Jeepistown, we have a beautiful place that's called Maboning. I'm definitely sure you've been there. You have seen how beautiful is that place. I'm staying not far away from Maboning, like just few walk to Maboning. And then when you invite the businessman like him, he will stand in front of you. The only language they understand, it's obviously it's a profit. They don't understand how it's difficult, how it's painful to be living in a beautiful place while there's a beautiful place around you, and then where you're staying, you're living in a shack. Let us not talk about the education is free. Education is not free yet. Because something is free is unconditional. The current education that is given, it's conditional because they are saying it's only those who are the first in higher institution. So what I would love to say, I would encourage violence. I would say if it means that let's call Donald Trump and the North Korean president to give us the nuclear, let's go for it. We need that because...
Okay, I do want to, Nonhle, again, I'm picking on you now. I do want to go to something else that you said in our introductory insight because I think it's fundamental. It is very important and we haven't dealt with it. Did I understand you correctly to say that because you opposed mining and what the government wished to do in your area, there are ways in which you are being punished? No service delivery, no investment, whatever it is that you accuse the government is doing. Are those the results or the consequences of standing up for your land, for your identity?
It's very true. Since we fight against the imposed development, because when you never ask, you call that it's been imposed to you. And the results of that, we are no longer part of the South African state. There is no services. That's the punishment right now as we're speaking. Because go to any offices of government today, you talk about Amadiba Crisis Committee or Kolobeni, they said those communities are anti-development because we don't want their own agendas, because we know that at the end of the day, what they want is to make profit and put us in shacks. That is why we said that we have a right to say no.
I mean, Wanelisa, this really should force a conversation about what we define as development in a country like ours. What are your thoughts?
I think development is a very Western concept, and it's when it's taught in university, it's from a very, very white middle class perspective. So our communities are not seen as developed. But I want to, because I think we can go in circles and in circles and in circles. The reality is that the ANC government is anti-poor, is anti-black, is anti-women, is anti-queer. That's the reality. That's why we're here. And we need to internalize that as we speak, as we sit here, we are the sacrificial lambs. The ANC has sacrificed our lives in order to protect white people, white global capital. So I personally think this is when the conversation needs to move. We know that government is not working. We know that government is not for us. And so we need to have a conversation around the structures are not working. What do we replace the structures that are not working with? And I think that's when we talk about decolonization, removing the structure, the colonial structures that the ANC is protecting in order for us to live, our lives.
Kumani, I want your thoughts on this particular point.
Well, part of the challenge that we have is that we have to take responsibility about our country. Yes. And the notion of government, we must first and foremost internalize it that it's us. I think what the leader here is saying to us, you have to answer the price of owning yourself. What is the price? And as I've said, it's death. Now, there is no development that will ever take place unless you are there. As young people here, I see lots of young people. You must know true knowledge. Not because if you can't go to university, you don't have knowledge. Study, read books, so that you can own your community. So, because if you're going to look to someone else to develop you, if you're going to look to money, if minister employ me tomorrow, you won't see me in the strike. That's the reality. Now, if we are collective, if we are a collective as young activists, we must know. Steve Biko, as we read about Steve Biko, all of us, he left university and built Zanempilo. Now, what we have to do, wear our own Zanempilos, so that when we build a hospital our own, when we build houses for elderly people on our own, as and when there's a protest, we can say that is our own development. Let's protest it, and that one belongs to government. Government must come and respond to us. We must take our own responsibility.
You know, Zaki, Wanelisa talked about dismantling the structure. And there's a school of thought that believes you can't wish the political system away. It is here and we must engage with it. I'm reminded of Prince Mashele, and we haven't responded to that in that clip, who said that there's no reason to go out to the streets and protest and so on. The biggest or most powerful form of protest is voting. Clearly not, because you know, administrations and parties change over and over again, but the structural problems remain. What are your thoughts?
Well, democracy is, that's a very impoverished way of looking at democracy. Democracy is about knowing, understanding, being able to speak sense, informed sense, knowledge, and so on. Democracy is about participating, using your voice, using your body. It is about actually, in different ways, getting to understand that Parliament is actually the last form of where things happen. We as a society need to build a new form of politics, because political parties, in the way that they operate, the first minute you get a new president, people jump ship. At the moment, you can't find anyone who supported Nkandla or anyone who supported Zuma. Or anyone who supported Thabo Mbeki in the arms deal, right? Now, none of those things. What we have to understand is unless you take the power yourself, unless you build the knowledge, things won't change. And that is the work of 50 years, of 100 years. It is not the work of one day. And governments think in terms of 1 day, 5 years, 3 years, and so on. We have to think much longer than that. But we cannot wait that long.
I mean, Nonhle, I'm just standing here thinking, how are you going to resolve Xolobeni? Do you think this issue will ever be resolved?
The issue of Xolobeni, I think is going to be resolved, but it will be not going to be nice. Fire by force.
Who said that?
Because it's more than 20 years that we say one thing and no. But this no, our government never take it, because their interest is to make profit, not to take care of human being. The human being does not exist on this date.
I mean, John, would you be willing to make a public commitment to compel your colleagues, yourself even, to meet with the Amadiba Crisis Committee, to talk to them? There's a lot of hurt, a lot of disconnect. Will you take this message to the new president?
Definitely.
The deputy minister says he will definitely. Who hasn't spoken? Okay, you've spoken, sir.
I don't want to comment something about the push auto councillors.
Yes, I'm Jeffrey Rasimpi from Tshepisong. I'm representing the Tshepisong community and as well as the Mogale City community. So I'm also having a view that I wanted to share with you to say, we are not dealing with the root cause here. We are having political analysts, and the Deputy Minister of Justice, of Injustice, who is to me, I think if I can be appointed in his position, I can do better than him. He doesn't use he doesn't use scenarios to address or to give solution to a problem. They've given us a scenario. If you are a doctor and a nurse, you use symptoms to identify the illness. And if you are indeed a deputy minister of justice, when I give you a scenario, then you told me about prima facie evidence, wherein the prima facie evidence are there to say this community went on strike because there's no water supply, there's no electricity, and they march, then they follow the procedures. And what is the problem with our government? I wanted to give you a solution so that you must take it, and report, to our upper structures. To say what is wrong with our government is that, number one, our government are beneficiaries of the schools that are being banned by the community because they tender and they win tenders and they get money. That is the point that we wanted to make. Let me again give you another point on that particular score. To say, you will never be listened more than your child teacher, if you are a parent. If you are saying this is wrong, saying, my teacher told me this, it didn't tell me that. Yeah. Then what I'm trying to, the point that I wanted to make only 2 points because I don't have time. And I've been raising my hand swelling for some time.
Many people.
So therefore, let me just make 1 point. The point that I'm trying to make is that the professional educators in the entire republic are the ANC government. I will tell you, they are the ones who try to manage this transition from apartheid regime by throwing stones. And they didn't face consequences of that. Then they won the government. Now we are having a democratic government. So what they are doing now is that they are making sure, not give services to the public, let them ban schools and libraries. We are going to get tenders and rebuild the schools. Yet then the Professor Siepe here is saying, I'm a teacher in the community. I'm teaching community. I have never won them because they said, Jeff, you are saying that let's not go and ban schools, let's not ban tires. But if we don't ban schools and ban tires, there are no service delivery that is going to be rendered. How do you win them? You can't confuse them.
Okay.
Political analyst, deal with the facts.
Okay, he mentioned you by name. And it is you thought I'd never give you the mic.
The question that was raised is why does it take so long for a democratic government to understand what should be obvious? And it's not like the issues that are raised are not known. They are known. But this is where the issue of protest comes in. That people go to the street because there is less listening or no listening. And John, while you keep on talking about the structures, I agree that they exist, but they are not effective, they're not efficient, and they're not working. What we hear here is that we need to find new forms of engagement. And simply relying on the ward councillors and all that are not performing, it's actually a problem. But let me also say, the issues that he has raised, if you look at some of our writings, have been always about decolonization. But the problem is, ideas on their own are not going to change anything. It's only through mass mobilization that things will change. If you talk about issues of justice, it's not that people, even under apartheid, did not know what justice was. They knew what was unjust. But it is only when people began to move to the streets and say, we're going to change it. Mm-hmm. So the notion of struggle and the notion of protest is a legitimate expression that says we are unhappy. The question that needs to be said is that now how do you respond to that? The police are not an answer. We know that from our history. Yes. But also we can't use the forms that had failed. Mm-hmm. And I think what we tend to do is that we tend to say, but these structures are there. But what you hear here is that they're not functioning, but also government is not listening.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a big one, disengagement from the people. I'll give John an opportunity. I want to go to this lady because you've been whispering gravy train, shouting gravy train. What do you have to say, ma'am?
My name is Thandiwe Mashia. I'm coming from Schubert Park. I'm the committee member. I'm sick and tired, my sister. I'm very
Speak a bit
sick
louder.
and tired.
She's sick and tired, she says.
I'm very sick and tired. Our government doesn't want to listen. We've been doing a protest, marching, barricading, all those things. We give them memorandum, we give them everything, but they don't want to do anything, no answer. So how are we going to stop the violence?
They're captured, that's the answer.
How are we going to stop the violence?
No, he's not. Okay.
We've got a court order from the Constitutional Court. And our government is not doing anything. The Constitutional Court ruling is on our side. We have to go back to where we were staying, in Schubert Park. Now we're staying in a temporal place. And they are harassing.
Forced eviction as well? You're
Yes.
forcibly removed.
And they are harassing us. If they want to do, for instance, what you call comrade, to come and do the audit. They are coming 2 o'clock in the morning with the metro. We've got the kids that they're supposed to go to school. We've got people that are supposed to go to work, but they don't care. They knock on our doors like we are criminals. That is violence. So in return, we are going to do the same thing. We won't stop. My sister, we are tired. We
John-
are sick and tired
John,
of our government.
Another message. Another message to take to the government. You know, this lack of engagement, this lack of compassion.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing this evening, what I'm hearing this evening are people who've had patience for a very long time. There are people who do not want to turn against their government and infrastructure and whatever else. They are being led to that position, not because they're not getting their own way, but because they're not being listened to.
Yeah.
Why has the government become so cold and detached, so disengaged? That doesn't require knowledge of this ministry or that ministry. It just requires you to sit in those cabinet, whatever you call it, and say, let's go back to the people.
Yeah.
Will you do that?
Yeah. No, definitely. If I can respond.
If John can respond, please.
Definitely, and there are numerous engagements that people on different levels are meant to have with their communities. Everybody in Parliament has a constituency. I have a constituency, it's in Richmond, KwaZulu-Natal. I go there. The issues that people are raising are definitely problematic, and I agree with Professor Siepe's point that we need to look at new forms of engagement. We need to look at correcting these problems where people feel they are not being listened to by these different levels of government and these different structures.
So quickly, we're running out of time.
Basically, my comment is on how the judiciary reacts to the protesters. My argument is that the legal system itself protects the elites. That is true. Because every time when students, workers, communities go on a protest, the first time the corporates or the government does is to run to court to get a court interdict. I've never come across a case where court interdict was actually denied against the big corporate or the government. So every time the rights of the people are being put on the line, they're being told that, hold on for a moment, let these guys continue as if nothing is happening. Second, we need to understand that 90% of our judges in the country are white Afrikaners judges that were there during apartheid.
Can I respond on that one? Can I respond on that one?
No, that's not true.
The only thing they know, how to treat a black person is we know.
Exactly, you're disputing that. I mean, and also even the interdicts. I remember even some marches last year where the police tried to stop the marches.
Even the courts have struck down.
Let me say this to you.
Okay.
Two quick things about that.
Okay, we
if
have
there's
to listen
one
to each other.
institution
Yeah.
that where people have actually been put through the mill is judges. I'm not talking about magistrates now, right? Magistrates are a different question. They've been there longer. But every judge that is sitting at the moment in our courts have been through the Judicial Services Commission, and they've been questioned. And for the first time, we have a majority of black judges. We still have too few women judges. And we still have too few judges that come from a working class background. And so at that point, there's just a little disconnection there. In the rural areas, you may have many of the old magistrates, black and white, that survive and are very cruel. You still have judges today, like Leslie Wynekove on Bromwell Street, who we had to deal with. But generally, our judiciary is not, it's people who don't have resources. Corporates have resources and they go. And the judiciary responds on the basis of facts in front of them. And sadly, we don't have the same power. A bunch of us chained ourselves to Delil's office because she wouldn't get, for about 8 years, people have been struggling to get sanitation, decent sanitation in Khayelitsha. There's a court case coming up in the Equality Court on it. Now, we chained ourselves to I was one of about 20 people who got chained. We were taken to court. We were convicted. Those of us who convened it, they want to give us 250 rand fine. We said, no, we're not taking this fine. The High Court decided a couple of weeks ago that when you convene a protest and you haven't given notice, you should not be criminalized.
That was undoing an apartheid era law. Yep.
That you should not be criminalized. So what the court said here is that if Sisnonhle organized the protest tomorrow without giving a notice, she should not be criminalized. That you shouldn't get a criminal record for it. We broke the law deliberately. We were prepared to face the consequences. We were not going to run away and say we didn't do it. We were prepared to go to jail. But we would be what I would term political prisoners, not criminals.
Okay. So, and I mean, I'm looking at your case as well. The court was on your side. The historic Grootboom case in housing, the courts were on the side of the poor. We've run out of time, but Deputy Minister, a whole lot more has come to you, and we want to give you the final word. And I suppose trying to find out, did you feel the pulse of the nation through this audience here, and what are you going to do about it?
Yes, I mean, thank you to everybody that raised issues. I'm sorry I didn't have the specific detail of particular matters, but there are issues I want to take up. So, Xolobeni, Maryvale, and there are other issues. I'm fairly accessible. My number is given out. People can. Well, look, you know, there's also politicking going on. So. There was anyway, let me not go into that, but that was a commission of inquiry that made recommendations, so that also needs to be looked at that. But from my side, I would like to take up as much as I can of the issues that people have raised, and I think the bottom line, though, is still the question of let's look at better forms of engagement so that people, when they have issues, can get listened to.
I must just say that we try very hard here on the Big Debate to get an eclectic mix, a diverse mix of people. Politicians don't like to be in forums such as these. We invite them, they cancel on us, some legitimately, some not. I must thank you for coming through. He flew... John Jeffrey was in Parliament yesterday. It's been a big week politically. He could have really cancelled. He flew all the way from Cape Town to be with us tonight. He still has to go back because the debate around the speech is being heard on Monday. But he came here to face you all. To face you all. And I must thank you for, I know there are so many views that we didn't listen to, so many of you who've traveled from afar and you've got genuine grievances, but we hope that we've been able to tap into those themes that you feel so strongly about, and that together we are going to boldly create the South Africa of our dreams. Thank you very much. Join us again next week, because next week we are going to talk about political parties and their funding. Why is there no transparency? Why are they all unanimous when it comes to their funding, and they like to keep secrets? Thanks for coming.